Hello, my name is Amos Roddy, and I am the composer and sound designer of Citizen Sleeper. First of all, thanks for inviting us to be part of this event. I think it's super cool, and I'm excited to watch the other videos. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the intentions and the process of writing the game's soundtrack. To start, just a little bit about the game itself. In Citizen Sleeper, the player takes on the role of an escaped worker who's just arrived on this abandoned but still inhabited space station called Erlin's Eye. And largely the game is about navigating this new life in this new place, as well as about the lives of the inhabitants of the station that you meet along the way. It's often very high stakes, but it's also often just quite mundane and day-to-day. It's people and relationships and how we choose to live within our own sentience, within our own mortality in whatever amount of time we have. And at least for me, that was what I wanted the music to be about. Sure, it takes place in, space. It's on a station, and it's arguably within the cyberpunk genre, whatever that means. But it's more about the intimacy and the day-to-day side of things that I was drawn to and that really resonated with me. Along those lines, I decided pretty early on that I wanted the music for the game to feel like it could have been written and created by residents of the space station itself, using, whatever limited means they had on hand or were able to build or repurpose. So subtractive synthesizers that were maybe constructed from repurposed transformers or tubes or circuits, or potentially amplifiers that were previously the speakers from intercom systems, old tape machines, audio samples through beaten up mics, pieces of metal or trash for percussion, so forth. And my initial intuitive pull was for the music to hopefully feel both metallic and cold, but also intimate and warm. The protagonist, the character you play, exists as both human and machine, and I wanted the tonal palette to reflect both sides of that existence. So in practice, for inorganic sounds, such as synths, this meant running them through like a crummy old tape deck or reamping them through a small Fender amp I own, just to bring in degrees of the organic unpredictability that magnetic tape and vacuum tubes and acoustic environments provide. Yeah, once digital sounds hit actual air, we're inherently introducing chaos. It's just the way acoustic environments work. And our ears love that chaos. It perks them up, and it's what we're used to hearing even if we don't know it, because that's how sound works as it travels through air. And at the other end, starting with, for example, something really organic, like sampling my own voice, this cold and warm idea meant piling on effects and turning knobs until I didn't feel like I was hearing myself anymore. My hope for the soundtrack is to kind of feel both these at the same time, and neither, which is, I don't know if that really quite works, but hopefully it did. And for anyone who's curious what I specifically used, much of the soundtrack is a Moog grandmother being run through the preamp of a defunct Akai reel-to-reel tape machine, which I then often resampled into a digital sampler for my own ease of use when using additional modulation after the print into Logic, which is my digital workstation. In retrospect, though, I think I could have used any synth, digital or analog, as most of the soundtrack's vibe and even arrangement actually comes from a heavy hand in post-processing, which was an approach that was inspired by the works of Boards of Canada and Aphex Twin, who are two artists I've been listening to for years and looking for an excuse to mimic or at least do some kind of personal interpretation of. Both these artists use processing heavily, and I was curious to experiment with fidelity degrading techniques similar to what I assumed they use. Both these artists also use repetition like quite unapologetically, which struck me as something that's sort of rare in modern music production. Modern digital technology just provides us with so many options. It's hard to resist tweaking and layering and adding variation and movement, which is something I generally agree with. But what happens if we just let music keep playing and maybe it doesn't need to change? And also personally, I've always struggled with using repetition in my music. So forcing myself to allow melodic sequences to replay over and over felt like a interesting and maybe even healthy challenge. I think repetition can be really hypnotic and beautiful, and can allow listeners to sort of imprint their own experiences on the music that they're listening to. And I think that was one of the kind of umbrella goals with the music, having it feel open to interpretation. And also, that's in line with how we implemented the soundtrack into the game. The music in Citizen Sleeper plays on a sort of context-sensitive jukebox that kicks in every once in a while based on a set of variables that we assign. So we're not like triggering specific music on specific story beats. For one, there were just way too many story moments for us to effectively score them individually. And I think even if we did, it'd be challenging and clumsy maybe to time them all correctly, because the timing would have to reflect the player's speed of reading, and of course everyone reads at different speeds, so finding that synchronicity would be quite difficult. But I think even if that approach had worked, I think it might have made the world of Citizen Sleeper feel a little less alive and a bit more predictable. Instead, we implemented music as a sort of emotional weather forecast system. Based on what's happening in game, the game engine will send a signal to our music system to tell it what mood of music to play. If, say, an in-game event is labeled as quote-unquote reflective, then when that event occurs, it prompts our music system to pull up a list of songs we've labeled as reflective, and then it picks one of those at random. Yeah, that's the short of it. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's the general idea. And I think it's kind of fun that there's sort of a dice mechanic hidden in the music system as well. And on the composition side, the system means that individual tracks need to be emotionally flexible enough to feel at home in a number of different narrative situations. I like to think of the individual tracks as sort of like photo filters that tint the gameplay. So, say like, how might you feel after a somber interaction with a character? Or at the beginning of a cycle in which you're beginning to starve. Two players might get two completely different tracks for particular in-game events, but at least hopefully both tracks are conducive to feeling a resonance with the given event, even if the music playing isn't telling you exactly how to feel. And in a way, the music is sort of ambivalent and sentimentally agnostic, which is something I'm actually really quite happy with in the soundtrack. Hopefully it isn't emotionally pushy, and hopefully it just adds a color here or there, or Well, actually, maybe more importantly, hopefully it gives the player space to reflect on what they're reading. I'm often drawn to music that invites a state of reflection or solace or spaciousness, rather than music that is clearly one mood or another. I think reflectivity and spaciousness aren't inherently relieving or oppressive or happy or sad or mournful or excited. Those are emotive reactions. They're interpretations and reactions that are ours, even if they might be involuntary. So imagine being under a large tree's canopy that's like in the middle of a safe grassy field on a rainy day. What is the emotional color to that? I think everyone is going to have a different answer, right? But the location itself is not the intrinsic piece of that emotion, even if it is what prompted it. And I think there's a subtle step in the middle, which is an observation of the self in relation to the space that one is in. So if Citizen Sleeper is the grassy field in the rain, I wanted the music to exist as that pre-emotional observational state rather than as the subsequent emotional reactions that might arise. And maybe the music elicits an emotion in the player, but whatever that emotion is, it isn't really because I was trying to push them in a certain direction. And I hope the music of Citizen Sleeper is able to express this distinction in some capacity. And I also hope that players are enjoying spending time in the game's world. Yeah. Thanks so much. And again, thank you for inviting us to be part of this. And I hope all of you are well.